always treasure all the pleasure that you will share. That paradise is bird's eye, where you will find everything is gay. And if you are after fun and laughter, come there today.
Today we are honored to have a conversation with the Honorable Henry Young, entrepreneur, former Minister of Government, the businessman who had the vision for Bird's Isle, which has become an institution, an iconic institution in its own right, place where we saw the explosion of music, dance, weddings, various meetings, of course, basketball. Many things have happened here on Bird's Isle over the last 50 years of its existence. Today we'll be talking to 85-year-old Henry Young and giving us a bit of Belizean history that many of us don't have. He is a person who has lived it. He was there. He can walk us through the steps and give us a bird's eye view, interesting, bird's eye view of Belize in the last 50 years.
I was born in Belize City here. My father is from Kikaka and my mother is from Placentia. I attended St. Mary's School and afterwards I attended St. Michael's High School. I had a pretty decent childhood. In those days, Belize was pretty peaceful and there was a lot of community spirit and people got along real well. I think where things started to change was around 1950 with the introduction of modern technology, where we became more involved with what's happening in the world. In 1958, in the latter part, at the time I was working as a clerk at the telephone department, which at that time was located upstairs where the old city council is. And I took a trip to New York and I came back, and then a few months later I went back because, as you know, at that time everything was New York. It was all the attraction. The propaganda at that time made everybody believe that there was gold on the streets of New York. The problem is, in those days, if you were an ordinary person, there were a lot of jobs to be had, like cleaning offices and all that type of thing. But I went there with a necktie and I wanted to get into where other people were above.
Yes, in the ordinary.
Yeah, and I started out painting with a fellow Belizean by the name of George Locke, who was my neighbor in Belize, and he had migrated earlier. And he had a painting business, and that's where I started out. And then after that, I looked up a whole lot of openings in the newspaper, but I realized that my beautiful complexion was a problem. But it was very subtle. But it's only when you got involved that you realize that there was a lot of racism. And after about the third year, I told my wife that I didn't think I was going to fit in. I used to associate with some members of the Muslim community and a Wallace Muhammad. But I told them that I couldn't follow them because they were saying that all white people are the devil. And I told him no. I said I left a lot of white people. Yeah, in Belize. White people in Belize who if they run over you if you don't stand up. And I said there's good in all races. when Malcolm went to Mecca, he had to break bread with blue-eyed people. He came back and he told Elijah that you've got to change to the phrase, there's good in all people. So when Malcolm was going to having his inauguration of his new organization at the Audubon Ballroom, which I'm very familiar because me and Compton Fairweather used to have dances there for the Belize people. And I was on my way to the Audubon Ballroom, but I had a flat tire on the East River Drive around 18th Street in New York, Manhattan. You had to pass through Manhattan and you go over a bridge, brings you right into the Bronx, to the Audubon Ballroom. And I was held up there for about half hour, And when I got into the Bronx, I saw nothing but men in blue, policemen. I asked them what happened. They said, they just blew away Malcolm. I would have been in the front seat. And probably would have got my ass shut up. At that time, anybody that was progressive was going to be dead. And I don't have to start from Medgar Evers, And you go right down the Kennedy brothers who tried, and then you get into Malcolm, and several other prominent, and then Martin. As long as you were a progressive, you were going to be cut down. I said, my home, Belize, didn't do me anything. And all of my brothers, they were first-class fishermen. And if I wanted to go into fishing, since I was more educated, I think I would have done very well. And I didn't have to catch 2 fish. I only have to catch 1 because my wife eat head and I eat tail, so I couldn't fail. I passed the word around in these basement parties, because that's where we used to have parties, in the basements, that I wanted to, if anybody had a truck that they wanted to take to Belize, I'd be prepared to take it for them, no charge. And a guy by the name of Makizi, and I got the truck, I packed up and I sent for my brother who drove my car, and I drove the truck and we came back. I had already started a business in which I was importing male and female wear on the canal side at the low flat of my mother's home. Thanks to a good Jewish guy, he hooked me up with the Jewish system of managing manufacturing, right? That when a style, like say a blouse, was out of style, all of the unsold was sent to this section in New Jersey, which was then distributed to the Caribbean and Africa. And then it became fashion there afterwards. I got to buy a property on King Street, and the name of the shop was Irma's Store. And then when I got back, we moved it there. And it was one of the most popular stores.
I could remember it.
In the
That was next
the
to
60s and 70s. I did real well, and until the East Indian from Idi Amin's era.
That's Uganda.
Uganda, yeah. Mr. Rogers, he was a big player in the government at that time.
He was
And-
the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
And he-
What actually happened?
He invited, because most of the Indians were moving out of Uganda and they were going to Britain, and they wanted to find places to spread them out. And he took on quite a number of them. He introduced them to Belize, and that's how they started to come to Belize.
So that's the beginning of this large Indian population we see in Belize now. It started around that time.
Right, because our Indian population at that time had already integrated.
Yeah.
Well, they were the same Indians,
Right,
but of a higher, in the caste system, they were higher. And their morals were pretty low. Some of them, not all. And I decided that I was going to get out of the clothing business because I couldn't do some of the things that they would have done. There was a toilet, an outdoor toilet at the entrance to Birds Eye here. And I used to come there in the morning, and I saw this piece of bush, known at that time as Blackbird Island. And I said to somebody that was sitting beside me that if somebody were to build a bridge and reclaim the island and have dance and weddings and all that sort of thing, they would do good. But at that time, they thought I was kind of loony, you know.
We used to call it Bud Isle, meaning blackbirds were over here. It was full of mangrove. It was where we would call bushy. Fishermen would come here, they would maybe fishing for sprat. Maybe they would come and hide in dory or the boat in this area. But by and large, it was just a piece of government property.
I made an application, and the only reason I got it through was because at the time I was friendly with Minister Perdomo. And he told his cabinet the same thing that the Belize people told me when I told them I was going back to Belize. They said as soon as I ran out of money, I was going to come back to New York. And
Now this Perdomo that you're talking about,
is the brother to the Rombaron.
yes, okay. So
He was the minister.
he was a minister of
Time.
the PUP government at the time. Yeah.
And he told the cabinet the same thing. Give the man the place, man, the car. I run out of money and he going back to the States. We're like,
So they didn't have no faith that you may have turned Bird's Eye.
to anything. And I fool all of them, including George Price. No, I got to work and I built the bridge, and I reclaimed the property with the help of my brother and some of my other cousins, you know. And we got a fellow from Corozal to do the thatch building, which is a huge thatch building,
So did you
almost
have
the
to pull it
size
up
of it.
much? Because
Yes, it was only the front part that had sand. The majority of it was mangrove. And I started to do very well because I was able to have Sunday functions with the kids, for which I charged $1. And we used to have 2 bands. And at times we had in excess of 2,000 kids out here. And there were absolutely no problem because at that time there was a lot of discipline among the young people.
Bird's Isle was the place to be. In the early 70s, Bird's Isle was the place where you had basketball, you had parties on weekend. Young people were able to come across Bird's Isle in the early 70s for $1 to come across the island. It was unique because it was in fact an island, Bird's Isle, but it was in Belize City. All you had to do was cross over that wooden bridge. It was a wooden bridge for many, many years. Some people were afraid to walk across that bridge. But once you got over the bridge, you were almost like in a whole new area. It was like having the key in Belize City, surrounded by beautiful white sand. The breeze was blowing beautifully off the Caribbean Sea. And people used to have dances here that would go way up into the wee hours of the morning. No fights, no murders, no kind of craziness that we have become so used to nowadays. So Bird's Isle is very important in the sense that it was a place that young people used to gather on weekends, especially on Sundays, where you could actually find Ray-Ban, the professionals, Jesus Acosta and the professionals. You could find McGregor and the Harmonettes, all very important bands in the early days.
It was the place. It was the place.
You know,
Yeah.
everything, Byron Lee.
And then I got Byron Lee in,
Yes.
and then I got Calypso Rose Sparrow, and we even had James Brown out here.
Yeah.
In 1975, me, my wife, and Winston Smiling and his wife made a trip to Trinidad. And upon seeing the carnival there, we thought it would be a good idea to introduce it to Belize. So in 1975, I started to introduce Carnival to Belize. And since then, it has been extremely successful and beneficial to the people of Belize.
It also became extremely popular for basketball. In fact, this was the place for years until they built the Civic, where basketball games used to be held. And so it was famous for that reason.
Basketball used to be at St. Ignatius, but there were a lot of trouble they had with some of the kids. And so the father threw them out, and so they came to me. And I had already put up my concrete building, the one that I lost in the last hurricane. And that's how basketball came over here. And it really grew faster than I could accommodate, like with the bleachers. You know, I was pinching, paying the bank, but it really grew and it became a healthy sport. We have never had a problem of any significance over here. So I'm glad I lived through that era, because imagine if you were to have it here now, it'd be a lot of headache. And at that time, the government was thinking about putting up a civic center. And a lot of people didn't understand. I was never against a civic center. I think we should have more. But what was the problem was that if I made a quotation for a project, for a business or a function, I would say, like, how much to rent Birds Isle? I'd tell him, well, like, let's say it's 500. The PUP gone and then get them for 200, get them the civic. You understand me? And it was unfair competition. That was my only objection, but we still need more than the one civic that we have, right? One of the biggest occasions we had on Birds Isle was when we got involved with boxing and we started to develop the sports. And it got to a height where there was one match out here. I think it was Lagonista and Fitzroy's Giuseppe. And I can remember patrons getting on the roof and hanging themselves upside down in order to enjoy that great event. Boxing was really a Sunday morning blessing for a lot of people in Belize. And then we introduced roller skating. There was a good lady from the US who was involved in roller skating, and she came and we made an agreement in which that sport was introduced into Belize. And trust me, it was really an occasion in which the kids of all class got themselves involved and enjoyed themselves immensely.
It was also the place where Minister Farrakhan came in 1975 when he was a young minister. He also came back 10 years later in 1985. And as you know, in 2014, he came to Belize for the third time. And each time he came to Belize, he was here at Birds Isle. It also became the place where there was any time a big event, such as a political meeting or some other form of gathering, that Birds Isle was the place that most people came.
It was a little before that, I think, when Said and Assad came back from England, and the propaganda organ of the big brothers, the big boys, stamped them as communists. And people swallowed that crap, you know. As you know, it was really a lie, but a lot of people believed it, you know. And I said at the time, I had just left the United States with this color problem, and here now they are going to come and introduce communism. And I really was upset, you know, at the time. And then I got involved with the Chamber of Commerce, got a lot of experience there, and I got involved. I got introduced to Rotary. I became a Rotarian. I found it was a very good organization. And then came my friendship with Carl Thompson and Paul Rodriguez, who was one of the first UDP mayor, and Net Vasquez and Manuel Esquivel. And we started the discussions on forming the UDP. But I really was not interested in the politics. I was really interested in helping them organize and raise the money.
So you were not an official member of the party, or you were just a friend of the party?
I was a founding member. But if I had made that known, there would not have been any Birdsile or anything like that, because you know at that price the PUP were very vicious when it comes to people who didn't toe the line. As a matter of fact, Mr. Price sent an emissary to talk to me and find out what is it I wanted. Was it money or what, you know? And I told, that time Birdsile was just starting up real good, you know. And I told my friend, I'm not interested in no money. I know how to make money, right? When it got around to, I think it was around the 80s, when they increased the number of house membership from 18 to 28. They split off the Port Loyola area of the Alberts, and I was being pressured to get involved in the politics, and at time I refused because I wasn't interested. But a couple of my friends told me that they feel like I would have a good chance of winning, even though the Port Loyola area was about 95% PUP. Mr. Golson used to win because the Albert portion was what carried him through. And they finally pulled me in, and when we had the convention, and the two previous speakers who wanted to be the candidate for Port Loyola gave their speech, when it got around to me, I told them, if you all support me, I'm not waiting until the election. I says, I would put in water in one street. I'll put in the main pipe, and you all bring your pickaxe and shovel, and you put in the smaller pipe to your building. I says, and we're going to start next week if you elect me. Well, the crowd went wild.
And this is even before you get elected.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is just
And
the
I was a
era.
good friend of Benny Finstein, the father of these boys. He had just started to get into the plumbing business when PVC came into play. And I went to him and I told him my position. I said, partner, you got to, I'll lean on you. And he credited me all of the pipes, you know, and I paid him in installment. And that's how I got the crowd in Port interested in moving the port out. There was only one street that was paved. At that time, only this main street going from Yarborough. The port was in total disarray. After I got elected, I got in touch with a friend of mine, an American fellow that was working for USAID, and I gave him the idea and told me to write a proposal. I did, and he furnished me with about 375,000 US. And that's how Port Loyola got a water system.
So you were the first elected representative of this newly created
Port Loyola.
called
Yeah.
Loyola.
And
Got in there on a promise that if you elect me as the standard bearer,
I,
put water
yes,
in it.
yeah, I don't come here with no, what I might do to this. I said I get in there and this is where we start. Right. And I'll never forget a joke when I was campaigning on Farber's Road. This really happened afterwards. There was an old mestizo fellow with his family who died PUP. And I was nurturing them to come around to my way of thinking. At that time we had started Black Party, right? And he came to me almost in tears. He said, Mr. Young, and I look forget with you and you ain't got function for only black people, right? Well, I had to tell myself, no man, I said it's the block. In English, he said, man, you say, you make her feel better. That's to show you the situation with people at that time, you know. Once they saw that I'm in business, I got most of the PUPs eating out of my hand, you know, because I really didn't bring up too much politics, Nuri, you know.
When you were in there, though, you put a lot of emphasis on tourism, and in my understanding is you became the first tourism ministry
No, I wasn't the first.
No, but you certainly, it was when you became Minister of Tourism that it looked as though this opening up the door to large influx of investors and such things in tourism. Is that so?
Yeah, because at that time we only had the Fort George Hotel as a, what you would call, or they would call a decent hotel, you know. I guess because of my travels, I used to travel a lot, so I saw where there was need for us to put together a tourism package. But my emphasis was on native involvement, in a sense like, for example, let's say we talk about a hotel. We can never build hotels as good as they do abroad with all the glass and concrete. And I wanted to put emphasis on the touch, because when people come and they go into these rural areas and they go to these nice places with the touch, they will put up a good argument. We might not be as good, but we're different. And we had all these attractions with the Maya temple and all of the sea life, which I saw as an area that we could really draw a lot of tourists, and it just took off, right?
So your emphasis was that there be more Belizean ownership in some of these businesses?
And up to today, I still insist that we should only have the smaller types of hotel, like the ones we have like in San Pedro, you know. I'm not saying you shouldn't have the big Fort George, but I think by having smaller hotels, you're going to get more of the local people involved. A lot has been said about investors who have been taking bookings and not passing the money through the US currency through the Belize system. I think this is a matter that needs to be aired, because there's quite a bit of hype, which I don't believe is true. These people who are taking bookings and are not passing the money through the system still have to bring a large portion of that money to Belize to service their holdings to the managers and the clerks and the yard people. They have to be paid, so a good portion of that money does come back into the system. By keeping a portion of the money abroad, they don't have to go through the process of buying US currency in Belize. They can transact their business directly, being in a position to write their US checks. So I don't see where this is so terrible. Yet I think it's a matter that needs to be discussed. And I think the DTIA should pick up the matter so that the Belize people could be more enlightened about what's happening in the tourist business. I think the e-commerce is something that we have to get involved in. And I think the Belize people are well equipped, well educated to be able to deal with that matter. And I'm saddened by what has happened today with this COVID-19, because a lot of ordinary people are left hanging with bank loans because things was going so good.
Having been one of the original authors of the tourism idea, how do you see it today, 2020? Was that a good idea to put so much emphasis on the kind of tourism that we have done?
Well, I wouldn't say it wasn't a good idea, because this COVID-19 is like, it's an across-the-board disaster for not only tourism, right? So I think what we have to do now is to reevaluate and start putting more emphasis on agriculture, because Belize and Guyana are the only two Caribbean countries that could come up with projects other than tourism. And I can see if the politicians of the day were to get together and start re-emphasize the importance of growing things. And also they will have a problem, because they will have to reorient the mind of Belize people, because a majority of us are onto this fried chicken. And if you tell them that you could get a good meal with callaloo, spinach, you know, mixed with a little fish meal and that type of thing. A lot of the children might not want to eat that, but again, we can still expand on the chicken and the fish, and we can reduce the amount of imported stuff and get the children to become more acquainted with nutritious food. I think our biggest problem is that starting from 1950, with the introduction of the new technologies, our moral compass moved. In my days, the ordinary folks, it was hard for you to bribe them because they believed in sins of the father falling on the children. And they didn't pay much attention to money. They needed money and they worked hard. But I think the biggest shift came in 1961 with the hurricane, whereupon a lot of people were allowed to migrate to the States. And most of them got sleeping jobs, which means that they weren't running a home. So they were able to send money home. And the people here got the impression that there was gold on the streets in New York, wherein most of the Belize people, if they do get a room, they would like 2-3 families. There was no structure, and the structure was removed from Belize because the parents left the children with the grandparents. And as you know, that as life goes on, different generations have different desires. I think that's where, with the advent of independence and all that, and our involvement in the world, our compass was moved morally. In my days, like I said, the older people, you couldn't bribe them.
You couldn't bribe.
You know, now
We had a certain price.
you having a discussion,
Yeah.
and you put a couple blue notes on the table and say, oh, wait, what was your position, right? But until we can get the young people to understand that you have to live a kind of principle if you want to live a good life. And you can't be allowing people to buy your support, right? Instead of convincing you to support. You remember when somebody chastised you on the street and you go home,
Yeah. You don't dare tell.
right? Because you won't get it again.
You get them.
You understand? And the policeman was a community officer.
Yeah.
They patrol a certain area and they took care of the community.
They know everybody.
Yeah, again, we watch that television and slowly our policemen are becoming,
They belong to the army now.
right, they're in the military. It's like the other day when they had this uprising, I forgot which one of the city, I saw something like a Bradley tank
Yeah.
on the street.
Yeah, man.
They are mad for that about 1 inch.
Yes, man.
That's no right.
The armory that they used to use on Desert Storm, and then they donate it to the various cities.
Because
And
they know they get
bring one down here too if we are slow.
yeah. This is something Chester might want to take up and utilize officers as community officers and let them work an area in which they familiarize
Started off
themselves,
with that, Mr. Young.
familiarize themselves with the neighbor. But
There
tell
were
him,
a lot of people around
well, tell him. And another thing,
into community police.
he was on the money when he said that to get the young people back on track, you have to start with the parents, and they threw them out. But it was totally correct. If you don't catch the child here, when your bone gets strong and big, you can't be.
Can be a problem.
I really am worried, and I'd like to make a prediction. Because the U.S. has closed off taking immigrants out of Central America and keeping the kettle from blowing off, right? The pressure is building in Central America, and there's going to be another upheaval. Remember the last one? We're talking about 25,000 of their people. And they've integrated into Belize quite good. But it's going to be a bigger one when this snow explosion come, and it'll be within a 5-year period.
Within the next 5 years, you're talking about?
You're going to have an explosion in Central America. Because the people are not going to continue subsistence living while one or two people have billions of dollars, right? And they only have $2. And that's what caused the explosion the last
It will
time.
result in them spilling over
And-
the border once again.
And then we are going to have an influx of in excess of that 25,000. So you must remember that the reason a lot of the manufacturing cannot be possible in Belize is because, and I know a lot of people will think I'm crazy, but for Belize to progress, we have to get more people. You need to be at least up to 500,000. So that, for example, like my good friend Bill Lindo, he has a lot of good ideas. Like, for example, one of them was, I think, a cement factory. We have all the ingredients for cement factory, but it's a big investment. And who are you going to sell to after you done pacify the Belize market? Because our cement is going to cost twice what the Honduras, Guatemala, or Mexican cement because of our higher standard of living, right? And so we won't be able to sell to them. So what are we going to do with the factory? You see what I mean? But if we had say like 500,000 people, it would be enough to sustain. In fact, that's just one of his good ideas. But I'm saying it can't work with the small, right? Charlie has a whole lot of good ideas. And then I remember the one with the introduction of the
10 grams of marijuana.
right. It was me, Compton Fairweather, Glenn Stewart, Alton Clark. We were over 70 club that we met on Thursday. We still do meet here on the outskirts of the restaurant. I wrote a couple of articles too, right? And pushed, and I'm certain that we should go further than that, because at the time they were locking up a whole lot of young people for a stick of grass, as I call it, no? Which to me didn't make sense, because they were removed from their parents, you know. And now you notice that nothing has changed. I mean, the people still smoke the weed, but not more than before. Right? But again, we have to be in step with Big Brother, you know.
Yes.
We can't, but we should move ahead of them and
That's where we get our main concern.
yes, and legalize because as I tell people, I mean, the way you could discourage people from smoking even cigarette is you got to tell them how your mouth smell, right? But you can't put a law to stop them, you know, because cigarette is legal, and scientifically it does a lot more damage than marijuana. Am I correct?
That's correct.
You know, so,
That's correct.
but the things to me smells awful.
Yeah, it smells.
One of the other big problems that we, and I mean we, the Caribbean and other countries, suffer from, and nobody has been paying it attention, is that we educate our people and they never in most cases stay. So you're not getting the benefit of educating them for the country because they would migrate. So until those kind of situation is addressed, where we get the so-called educated or elitist kind of people to stay, it's going to be hard to not being governed by that thing that Mr. Price had said was going to be bad for Belize, that television. I didn't agree with him because you could actually get an education, a university education from the TV. But most people don't look at that. They want to see Jerry Springer and that kind of low life, right? So I feel that Belize has a good future because we are basically a good people. But we are docile. We have not had to fight for anything or shed blood, right? We get whatever we want without feeling the pressure. And when it comes to like poverty, the statisticians tell you that we have a 40% poverty. I will say of that 40%, 20% is poverty of the mind. Because as I said, Belize and Guyana can get themselves together and get out of this problem, whereas those other little islands, they don't have the wherewithal or the landmass. If we could stop the migration of the brain power, that would be one area in which we can get to some proper, and again, it's an area of, are we going to follow the kind of capitalist society that you have in the United States? Or are we going to look at the European model that is more amenable to inclusion? And the Americans are good people, and the Americans are very good people. The problem is with their leadership. The guy at Amazon, he is heading to be a trillionaire. He's on his way. Which means he's one man, but he's amassing like 20% of the world finance. And we are down here. You see, that much smarter than me and you, that we only worth $2 and he would. You get the point I'm making?
Yeah.
We have to move away from that and start looking more at the European type of capitalism, which has a big social part to it, rather than having one set of people controlling the bigger part of the government, right? So, as you're saying, I think we're going to come out of this situation being a better Belize. But we have to, a lot of sweat.
You know, the history is so important, Brother Henry, because there's so many young people and even older people who don't have any connection with history of Belize. Maybe they have their own personal experience, but they don't have a sequence of how this happened, like this, and they're so disconnected, you know. So more and more people like yourself who are still alive and still got fluidness, because you know some people may be in their 70s or 80s, but
burnt out.
They've lost it.
Yeah, I am on my way there.
We need to get persons like you know, but your recall is very, very
yeah.
good. We need to be able to have these people talk to our young people, because